Hello everyone, I'm Mrs. Bradley and I'm going to be doing some poetry revision with you today, focusing specifically on When We Two Parted. It hasn't come up yet in the exams and we feel we're due a romantic poem, so it's definitely one to focus on. So just going over your mock exams that are coming up, and then obviously your final exams. You get 2 GCSEs for English, you get a language and a literature. There are 2 language papers, paper 1 and paper 2, and there are 2 literature papers, paper 1 and paper 2. Now the poetry section, which is from your love and relationships cluster, is in paper 2 for literature. So you'll do your inspector calls first. When you've done for 45 minutes on your inspector calls, you'll move to your poetry and you'll do about 45-50 minutes on your poetry. It is exactly the same assessment objectives. You will have seen these before. It makes things really simple in English. You're being assessed on 3 things. And just to go back, it won't let me go back, so I'll just talk you through it. Assessment objective 1, are you quoting? Are you explaining? Are you answering the question clearly? Assessment objective 2, are you analysing language? And assessment objective 3, context. All 3 of those aspects are being assessed here. So you get 1 question, there is no choice, and you get 1 printed poem which you will then compare with another poem of your choice, and that will be from memory. And you're going to be asked a really specific question. So the example on this slide is compare the ways death is presented in Eden Rock and one other poem. So you're going to be specifically talking about death in this poem, and there's 30 marks available. It will be 12 for AO1, 12 for AO2 and 6 for AO3. So how do you structure it? Well, you do your first AO1 paragraph from the named printed poem in front of you. Your second paragraph is going to be an AO1 paragraph with either a specific quote or a specific reference from your chosen poem. That'll be the one from memory. Then you're going to do an AO2 paragraph from the one in front of you. And you're going to do an AO2 paragraph from the one from memory. And you are really looking for 4 paragraphs here. There shouldn't be any less. Your AO3 context will be weaved in. So wherever it feels necessary to talk about love and death and relationships and feelings and brothers and sisters, fathers, mothers, lovers, wherever it feels relevant to talk about any of those things, that's context with love and relationships. So how have we been teaching this? Well, hopefully no matter who's been your teacher these last 2 years, you will have learnt it in the same sort of way. So it will be in 4 sections. You will have a summary of what the poem's about. So in a nutshell, do I know what this poem's about? It's likely that that's going to be your first sentence. Your context, and we're going to have sort of 2 main contextual points, like these are the 2 nuggets, my 2 things I'm going to remember. AO1 feelings. At least 1 feeling in the poem, so I know the feeling is this and here's how I know it, and at least 1 AO2 quote. This is the one I'm going to analyse my language. So for every poem you want to be able to have those 4 things solidified in your mind. You want to be able to know this, and this is a really good revision exercise. For the 15 poems you could draw 4 boxes for all 15 poems and see how many you can fill in without having to look back through your anthology. So focusing specifically then on When We're Two Parted today. So you can see here that there's a video. Hopefully, if this works, you can click on it and you can listen to it being read by Tom O'Bedlam in a sort of creepy voice. I always like to play it to my class, and you can now listen to that at home. If it doesn't work for whatever reason, you can just Google that, pop that in YouTube, and you'll be able to listen to it. Or alternatively, you can read it yourself. So I'm going to pause for a moment, and you're going to take the time to either listen to the poem or read it yourselves. Now, what I'd like you to do now is in your exercise books or on a piece of paper, I want you to draw those 4 boxes. The summary box, the contents box, the AO1 feelings and the AO2 quotes. And I'd like you to try and complete that box without me and without any of your notes. What can you remember about this poem? I'm going to pause now and let you have a go at that. Now what I want you to do is look at the poem, and hopefully, you might have a copy in front of you. If you haven't, maybe you could print this slide. Otherwise, just read it and think, okay, what are the key things I can remember? What can I annotate here? Is there anything I can remember about Victorian times or romanticism? What feelings are there? Which was my AO2 quote? Now I'm looking at it. Okay, now I'm going to talk you through the poem. Now, it stands a chance that I'm not going to say everything that you've been taught in lesson, and that I'm just going to go through the main things, and so you're not going to, there might be extra stuff that your teacher's taught you, there might be things I'm saying that your teacher hasn't taught you, but I'm just going to go through it quite quickly, just so that you can recap it in your mind. So, when we two parted, interesting that the title, it sort of encapsulates this really painful moment when the relationship ended, when they parted, and Lord Byron is speaking directly to her. So when we two parted, in silence and tears. So, they had unspoken feelings, they were in silence, they weren't allowed to talk about it to others. It was a secret relationship, a forbidden relationship, but definitely, couldn't communicate to one another. Half broken hearted, so we begin to question, were they ever committed? Was she ever committed to him? Was he ever fully committed to her? Or was it because this was an affair that they're only half broken hearted? But then it is severed for years. And if you sever something, you sort of cut it, don't you? You scar it. It's marked for life. And this is going to have a really long impact on him. Pale grew thy cheek and cold. So she became emotionless. That tells us she broke up with him. So she became cold. Colder thy kiss. Something had changed in the relationship and the way she felt towards him. Truly that hour foretold. It was almost like predictable sorrow to this. The dew of the morning sunk chill on my brow. So a bit of pathetic fallacy there. In the morning when you wake up and there's sort of wet on the grass, that's the dew. And he's sort of weighed down by this heartache. It's sunk on his brow. Perhaps if he's up so early that there's dew on the morning tells us that, he's just really sad and he can't sleep and he's up early. Or perhaps the chill on his brow, he's sort of broke into a cold sweat. He's really upset by this. It felt like the warning of what I feel now. So, the weather was bad and he was bad and just knew in the pit of his stomach that something was going to be bad this day, of what I feel now. The vows are all broken. Now, whether that is vows they took to one another and they undertook and made a commitment to one another, and he feels that they've been broken. Maybe she's sort of deceitful. Perhaps it was a wedding vows. Either way, he's incredibly bitter and broken by this. And light is thy fame. Her reputation has been tainted. His reputation has been tainted. He's quite famous. So we know that he had many scandalous affairs. I hear thy name spoken. People are gossiping about them and share in its shame. This is an affair and so would have been frowned upon in society. They name thee before me, so people are gossiping more. There's pressure of public opinion here. It just enhances his solitude. He's very much alone. A knell in my ear. Now, a knell, spelt in that way with a K, is a death bell rung when someone's died. So it's almost a metaphor for their love, that it's over, the relationship has died. A shudder comes over me. So we've got physical reaction to it, the loss of her. Why wert thou so dear? Why did I love you so much? They know not I knew thee, and knew could be a euphemism for sex. He can't say it, that during the time this is written, we're talking about Victorian times, you don't talk about things like that. So definitely euphemistic. He knew her well, but he also knew her literally very well. But people didn't know. The public didn't know. This was, anonymous. Who knew thee too well. He knew her very well. He was very involved with her. Long, long shall I rue thee. If you rue something, you feel regret, and he feels anger and regret that he ever knew her. Too deeply to tell. In silence we met, in silence I grieve. So it tells us that revelation that the relationship was a secret one. And he grieves her. He feels sorry that this is over, and almost like the death of her, that thy heart could forget. So he feels rejected by her. Thy spirit deceived. He feels like she's lied to him. If I should meet thee after long years, how should I greet thee? With silence and tears. You know, in the future when we meet one another, how can I ever talk to you? How am I meant to meet you? How am I meant to associate with you in public when I loved you so much and you broke off this affair? So that is the poem in a nutshell, and now we're going to talk through the 4 sections. Okay, so that's the poem in quite a basic way, just going over the key ideas. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to revisit those 4 areas. So the summary, the context, the AO1 feelings and the AO2 quotes. So let's look at a summary of it. What is the poem about? Well, in a basic way, When We Two Parted was written by Byron to express his sorrow at the loss of a relationship. He implies that the relationship was a secret, so he's only able to grieve in secret. This leads many people to believe that the poem was inspired by one of his many affairs with Lady Frances Wedderburn Webster, a married upper-class woman. What context information do we need to know? Well, he was a scandalous and rebellious figure, and really the details of that I'm going to go through are sort of more to give you background. You wouldn't need to discuss this. All you'd need to know about Byron is that he's a scandalous and rebellious figure. He had a relationship with his half-sister and she gave birth to his daughter. He married Annabel Milbank in 1815, but she left him because of the rumours of incest. Byron was a ladies' man. He had many relationships with high-status women and would often write about these relationships in poetry. He was an international celebrity of the time, and his poetry was condemned on moral grounds. They sort of didn't like that he talked about risque subject matters, and he was described as mad, bad and dangerous to know. So what are the 2 things that you need to remember? 1, he was a scandalous figure who had many affairs, and 2, that he was a romantic poet. Those are the 2 main things that you need to learn and revise for Lord Byron and When We Two Parted. Now I'm just going to really quickly go over what it means to be a romantic poet. Well, it means that you like to focus on the individual, that you like the natural world, that you are interested in the physical and emotional passion. You're interested in sex and love and relationships, but outside of traditional confines of getting married and being monogamous to one person. From Shakespeare to Shelley, nature is the perfect backdrop for things, but when trying to communicate ideas about things being pure, and often the city is associated with sort of pollution and corruption, politics, law, things that are associated with rules, whereas nature, there's a freedom to that, and that's why the romantics often use nature as a backdrop. Often they wrote about sort of rustic country life because it was seen as sort of perfection. Now, here is another video which is quite good, and he just sort of talks about Lord Byron and how he felt and what influenced those feelings. I'm not going to press play here, and I don't know if that is a mistake. I'm not going to press play here. Hopefully you can play it from your end, but if you can't, just go on YouTube and type in Lord Byron, When We Two Parted, Poetry Between the Lines, BBC, and you'll find this video. Okay, and it's worth watching. It's about 10 minutes. It gives you some nice background information, but genuinely the 2 things you need to remember: romantic poet and scandalous figure. So AO1 feelings. There are many feelings discussed and explored throughout this poem, But the main feelings for AO1 that you'd want to talk about is pain and bitterness, you know, just feeling that absolute heartbreak. So half broken hearted is a nice quote for pain. And the idea that he's bitter that he ever entered this relationship, that he let himself feel these feelings, that she left him. So you could have sort of a dramatic pause now, isn't it? The vows are all broken. There's a bitterness to that she made promises to him and that she went back on him, and that perhaps long, long shall I rue thee. He regrets the day he ever met her. And finally, grief. And I think what you'd want there is a knell in mine ear, and now you just want to remember that he can hear this death bell that signals the end of the relationship. So the main AO1 feelings are pain, bitterness and grief. Now, in terms of AO2, I like to look at in secret we met, in silence I grieve. And I know that maybe your teacher has chosen a different quote, and that's absolutely fine. It's not there's one's better than the other. This is just one I like to do. So if you want to jot down in secret we met, in silence I grieve, in the middle of a mind map, I'm going to talk you through some key ideas. You can talk about the idea of secrecy, that they met in secret, this noun, that it was an affair, that it was this clandestine relationship, because it would have been a scandal. And remember, that's true. It was claimed that Lord Byron wrote this poem about Lady Frances Webster, who he was having an affair with, but she also had an affair with the Duke of Wellington, which was a bigger celebrity than Byron was, and it was that upset him. He supposedly broke off the relationship in order to save her reputation, only to feel betrayed by the fact that she was then having another affair. So you can talk about why they met in secret, because the person the poem was based upon was married to somebody and it was an affair. And then you could talk about the fact that he then felt betrayed by her. You can look at the collective pronoun of we. It's not often used and shows a significant point in their relationship, that they were together, there was a connection. And you could then look at the past tense of met. It's, you know, they used to be unified, they used to meet, they used to be together, and now that's no longer the case. Then you can look at the fact that they meet in silence. So that in secret we met, but in silence he's alone. And you can talk about why he's in silence, talk about that noun. Unable to talk about his feelings to anybody. This was an affair. Unspoken feelings, that they couldn't talk to one another. You know, sometimes when you're with someone and it's a relationship based on physical lust and attraction and not anything much deeper, so perhaps they couldn't talk about it. It was a forbidden love. Now, you can then talk about the juxtaposition, which is the contrast between the collective pronoun we and the singular pronoun I, because together they met, but he grieves alone, he's isolated, he's forgotten. And then you can talk about the metaphor of grief, because when you grieve, it's the feelings of sadness and mourning when somebody's died, and nobody's died, but this is a loss of the relationship. He's sort of comparing to the loss of a close loved one. He feels this intense sorrow, this pain. And if you were going to be clever, you could then link that to the metaphor of the knell, and that there's this wider semantic field of death, because the death of this relationship for him is the death of happiness. It's quite important that you've got this anaphora, so in secret we met, in silence I grieve, really just emphasises that juxtaposition between the relationship in the past and him on his own in the present. So that's the AO2 quote that I like, and I'll pop some notes on the slide if you missed any of that and you just want to go over the basics. Before I do that, what I'd like you to do is have a look now at these questions and think, okay, if this question came up about when we two parted, what would I say? So the theme of loss. If this question came up, how is the theme of loss presented in When We Two Parted and one other poem of your choice? What would you talk about? And now what you could do is plan out your 4 paragraphs, AO1, AO1, AO2, AO2. Then you can do the same, the theme of difficult times in When We Two Parted. In what way is a difficult time being shown in this poem? And where else a difficult time shown in another poem? The theme of romantic feelings. Are the feelings romantic in the poem? Are some romantic feelings lost? And which poem would you compare it to? Strong